I said it was going to get worse, and worse has arrived. Looks like Cuomo is going full Governor Newsom. Right, Governor Newsom in California has enacted the exact same thing.
We're looking at these 4 tiers, color coded, making it a little simpler for folks: purple, red, orange, and yellow. We don't put up green because we don't believe that there is a green light. It just says go back to the way things were, or back to the pre-pandemic mindset. Quite the contrary.
So like I said, it's not because New York is seeing a rise in hospitalizations. Right? I've been a nurse for 8 years, and I've said it before. I have not seen a COVID patient in months, about 3 months to be exact. And the vast majority of the patients that we, of course, had in the hospital were typically your geriatric patients or individuals who were highly likely to basically catch just about anything. I have not seen any of these patients in quite some time. I think currently, with the number of patients, we are at 705. I believe the latest update. Again, there are 23,000 New York State, and not in the city. We're not talking about just Manhattan. We're talking about in the entire state of New York, with 19.4, 19.5 million people. Out of the 19.45 million people, there are 718 of them that are in the hospital for COVID, right? There's 718 out of 19.5, I believe it's 19.5 million people that live in the whole entire state of New York, right? And out of all those individuals, 700-ish of them are in the hospital who have tested positive. Again, it isn't that we don't know whether these individuals are symptomatic. We don't know if these individuals are just in the hospital for other things and also have tested positive for this, right? For this particular virus. And so even if we were to say that every single one of them is a symptomatic individual, they're just there for the virus. Let's just pretend they were just in the hospital for the virus, right? So if that was the case, then we would just divide the 718 of them that are in the hospital, and we would divide it by the number of beds. And that would give you the percentage of patients who are in the hospital in the entire state of New York. And that would represent the number of beds that have been dedicated solely towards individuals who are, of course, infected with the virus, right? And that brings you to 3.3%, right? 0.3%. You have 3% of all hospital beds, right? So out of the 19 point whatever million, of course, that whittles this down even further, to an even smaller percentage of whether or not you're going to contract the virus, an even smaller percentage of whether you're even going to need medical assistance in dealing with the virus. More than likely, you will be home watching Netflix or watching television, relaxing, quarantine, right? But yet we see Governor Cuomo going full on Governor Newsom. And so now we have whether or not the capacity in which you can worship being impacted, mass gatherings, businesses, whether your business will be allowed to be opened, or if whether your children will have to be staying at home, and whether you'll have to make some sort of arrangements so that while they're home, someone can watch them, because maybe you're working and you can't afford to stay home. So now, of course, the government, and I said this before, government in every way, shape, or form trying to impact, especially in democratic states, how you live your life, not based off of sick people coming into the hospital, but whether or not individuals who are swabbed test positive or not. Testing positive for a swab is not an indication of how deadly a particular virus is, whether it's this virus or any virus for that matter. What matters is whether those individuals need medical help, how young those individuals are, what sort of comorbidities those individuals have, and the length of stay. These are very important things to understand. Age, if it's typically older people, then young people should not, of course, be forced into quarantine, they should be able to go about their business, especially if they're super low risk, like what we see today with the current pandemic. If it's individuals who typically have comorbidities, then again, if you are a healthy individuals should be able to go about their business. They should be able to continue to go to work, to have their children go to school, and of course be educated. Length of stay, or I should say, whether or not these individuals need treatment, and of course the type of treatment that of course is needed. Some patients might come into the hospital just for a few hours for observation. Typically, individuals who come into the hospital, especially now, usually have some other form of disease that is going on within their body that impacts their ability to fight off basically any form of disease, but especially a novel virus. So they might stay in the hospital for a little bit, require just a little bit of monitoring, and then they get discharged the next day. Sometimes we will get patients that way. We'll be like, why is this patient coming? They'll just come for observation. They'll stay for a day. And by the time I come back for my next shift, they've been discharged. And you're like, why do we even bother to admit this patient? But that's the system. It is the way it is. So we move on. Of course, the length of stay, of course, impacts the severity. As individuals require longer stays in the hospital, they run the risk of developing hospital-acquired other infections, right? Either from touching things within the hospital that are contaminated, or individuals who work in the hospital then bringing contaminants into the room, and then of course the patient developing a secondary infection. This happens with Foley insertions, or it happens basically whenever we put in an IV, or if that person requires a central line, or if that person required intubation. These are all things, of course, that are to be taken into consideration. The longer, the more invasive the procedures, the more likely that individual is to develop secondary problems. And of course, the more complicated the procedures, people make mistakes, medications are given without understanding, of course, how they will fully affect your body. Everybody's body is different. Teaching hospitals, of course, are another source of where mistakes can be at times made, where individuals are ordering things, maybe too much fluid is ordered, and that person has a weak heart. Now that person starts to develop fluid overload, they have shortness of breath, they have difficulty breathing, they need Lasix. Then you have an impact on how that will affect the kidney. The human body works in a very intricate way, and it requires a very delicate, and that's why you'll see a lot of the good doctors that will typically take more of a let's wait and see sort of attitude instead of let's aggressively starting medication, where maybe medication is not necessarily needed, and the body of course will go back to homeostasis. So these are some of the important things to consider when you're looking at charts like this, when you're constantly hearing things about the virus, and numbers and cases. I put cases in quotations because of the misuse of the term. Every time someone tests positive, it does not mean that that individual, of course, is a case within the hospital setting. That individual could be completely asymptomatic and could be at home, like I said, just watching Netflix, and you're thinking that the virus is spreading and it's out to get you. And so again, here we are with Governor Cuomo's new agenda for how he will control your life, whether or not you'll be able to work, whether or not your business will be open, whether or not your boss will be able to open his business, whether you'll be able to go out there and, I don't know, am I allowed to do dining or not? Can I do dining? This, of course, will impact the amount of money that, of course, the state gets. Is this because people are just dropping left and right? Is this because individuals are sick and are requiring medical personnel like myself to provide treatment for them? No, it is not. The numbers do not show that. Like I said, 3% out of all the beds in the entire state are being utilized for the particular virus. And this is why I say, and I keep saying it over and over and over again, in democratic states, this is what we're seeing. You see the exact same thing in California. We're seeing the exact same thing, of course, here in New York, all the while, right? So no more than 10 people can be in a place of worship, right? And so, of course, this is predominantly in relation to what had been going on with the Hasidic Jews, right? So the Hasidic Jews here located in New York State and places like Brooklyn, for example, have literally been going about as business as usual, meeting in packed churches, etc. With, of course, as far as I have heard, no deaths. Because if there were deaths, I guarantee you this would be in the media, but it's not. You're not hearing of rising deaths. You're not hearing of Hasidic Jews dropping left and right, going into the hospital setting, requiring hospitalizations. This, of course, is what we're not seeing. But it is a form of control, to control individuals that the state feels are getting out of line. And the easiest way to do it is to pit people against each other. Because if your kid can't go to school because the Jewish people are non-compliant, you start to feel some type of way. And this is how racism starts. If you can't go to work because you're a business in an associated area where there are numerous individuals who are non-compliant, now becomes impacted, you can start to develop hate towards those individuals. Not because of the science, not because of the math of rising hospitalizations, but just because you are not falling in line with the current narrative. And that narrative, of course, is that the pandemic is deadly and we're out here protecting you. And really, is that the case? No, that is not the case. New York State is in a huge deficit in terms of being poorly run. And of course, they're pushing the Republicans to basically fund many of these Democratic states that are run poorly via bailouts. And of course, as Trump has said, he is not going to be bailing out Democratic states that are poorly
signals
run.
on the issue already. Trump tweeted, quote, "Why should the people and taxpayers of America be bailing out poorly run states like Illinois, as example, and cities, in all cases Democrat run and managed, when most of the other states are not looking for bailout help? I am open to discussing anything, but just asking."
Of course, New York State is an example of a very poorly run state where you have an overinflated budget and you have individuals working within the public sector who are basically robbing the public sector here, robbing the taxpayers. I'm going to link a video from a YouTuber that I follow that was very informative, dealing on this very same matter. And this is, of course, is what's going on here within New York. It's a real good way to keep people online because it impacts your ability to feed your family. It impacts your ability to maintain your business. It impacts your ability to go to work and to have your children educated, or whether or not they'll be stuck doing distance learning, and whether all these schools will be closed. This is primarily pushed by the teachers union. Who, of course, back the Democrats. And that's why you see constant where the teachers will push back against anything the state does, and the state favors the teachers union and they don't favor the children. Is it because children are out here getting sick? No, children have the lowest percentage of being infected and requiring any sort of medical personnel to take care of them in any way, shape, or form. But again, this is what goes on where people don't push back. And like I said, and like I say at the end of every single video, if people don't take a stand, it will only get worse.